Do you think that the diabetes is a pandemic kind of like it's going to spread really fast? I'm guessing because of all the sugar content and people being addicted to sugar, it's maybe spreading extraordinarily fast.
Yeah, yeah. Most of diabetes is now couched appropriately in the kind of realm of insulin resistance. So let's talk about that
Mm.
for just a moment. If you have glucose that's elevated, as I mentioned previously, insulin will be secreted, and its job is to take the glucose and move it back down. The problem is if we're spiking glucose all the time, insulin has to get louder and louder in order to realize that outcome. I've done carpools with my kids in the past, and I'll have a car full of those kids and all their friends, and they're screaming and yelling. And I become somewhat kid resistant as I'm driving down the road in that example, where I'm sure they're yelling and screaming and doing their thing, but I've tuned it out and I'm just kind of focusing on my world for a moment. That is an example of how insulin resistance works. The signal's really loud, but our cells are just resisting that signal, or they don't respond as well. Insulin's job is to knock on the cell, open up a door to allow glucose in. And if we're resisting that, which all of our tissues can do, that's where the pandemic aspects might trickle in, right? If we can't manage glucose, it's available in excess to inflame us and glycate us.
And how long does that process take of becoming insulin resistant?
It's really over I mean, you can become insulin resistant in just a few hours. If you flood your body, okay, you're gonna have a big bowl of oatmeal in the morning, a couple of donuts, an iced coffee, sugary soda right after that. Our insulin's gonna go higher and higher, and our cells will begin to not respond to that signal as well. Again, much data out there will suggest around 6 hours you can do that. I'd counter that by also saying you can become more insulin sensitive within a day as well. So the most insulin sensitive we are is when we wake up, right? We've already naturally fasted as we slept. Delaying your first meal until lunch, for instance, is a strategy that many use effectively, and that maintains your sensitivity throughout the day a little bit better than having a big breakfast. So it is a switch, but the kind of problem that exists is when we eat sugar all day long and never break. We're watching Netflix at night with a bag of chips, and then we, start early in the morning with a big sugary breakfast. So that's the problem where we become chronically insulin resistant.
What do you think people should be eating for breakfast?
Well, I'm not a clinician, so people will want to definitely make sure that they're doing as their physician may recommend. That is a little caveat to that. We've got to make sure our physicians are well educated. From my personal experience, I don't eat breakfast. I have a meal at night, and then I don't eat until noon. I just have a tendency to keep myself busy, and I monitor my blood sugar occasionally, and it does really well. So I think the first meal after an intermittent period of no food is
Hmm.
something that is rich in protein and fat. That will be the best thing that's what they call insulinogenic, doesn't induce
Yeah.
insulin early on.
But could you not say, so we described the process of the mitochondria, kind of these vibrations going on as you inject the glucose into them, and then if they're going too fast, they might turn over or die or mutate, whatever it might be. But if you're
Mhm.
not eating, would the opposite not happen? Would they not run out of energy?
Yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily say let's just circle the wagons again on the mitochondria behavior with too much sugar. It's almost like an engine, a car engine. If it's idling along, it's doing really well, or even if you're traveling down the road at 30 kilometers an hour or something, it's working well. And that's how mitochondria should be. But have you seen an engine, or have you maybe perceived an engine that's, the accelerator is floored, it's really working hard, a lot of
Hmm.
exhaust is being released? That's kind of how the mitochondria are. The more fuel we put into them, they'll work harder and spit out byproducts that are undesirable, like the free
Okay.
radicals. Now, if we back off on the food, back off on the glucose, again, the liver will make sure we have enough, and they'll just get back to the humming normal aspects of mitochondrial behavior. And that's the best part.
So describe what you kind of touched on it before, but describe exactly what free radicals do that is
Yeah.
dangerous or is bad.
Yeah. So free radicals are really small charged aspects, basically derived from oxygen consumption. Mitochondria will take a fuel source, usually glucose, and go through a process called eventually glycolysis, and then the Krebs cycle and electron transport. All of that energy manipulation is called cellular respiration. In the process, they'll consume oxygen, that's essential. And at the end product, if you're going through it so fast, you'll spit off, like I say, small charged ions that are derived from oxygen consumption. Those are really small. They don't require a transporter. They don't require any help. They can perfuse any tissue and navigate any organ or molecule essentially and cause damage. Because they're so small in charge, they just make molecules unstable, and that's the problem.
So the reason that they cause damage is because they make molecules unstable.
Yeah, and they break them down, and all that's kind of under this broad umbrella of oxidative stress. You've heard about oxidative stress is where you have an inflammatory causing mechanism working in overtime where you can't diminish that stress. Because all of us are going to release free radicals. It's just we release such a small amount that we're able to eradicate them with normal cellular cleanup machinery. But where they're in excess, we overwhelm those defensive systems. And, we've been taught a lot from our youth, eat your vegetables, eat your polyol type of food sources because they're rich in antioxidants. And that's what we're using right now. We just don't want to overwhelm them to where we have massive oxidative stress with free radicals.
Okay. Wow, that's interesting. And
Mm.
when things get inflamed,
Mhm.
that's a defense response to the free radicals specifically.
That's right. Yeah, you'll recruit additional cells, additional enzymes, inflammatory molecules that get cells to that area. And all of that is the inflammation idea that we've come to know about. Now, keep in mind, acute inflammation is really good. You have an injury, you
Hmm.
have a wound, redness, swelling, and heat. That's a sign that you're working to repair the process. The issue, though, is after you repair the process, those cytokines is what they're called, inflammatory molecules, should subside and go down. But what we're referring to is the chronic inflammation, the one where we never really address the trigger, which is excess glucose in this case, and that inflammation is robust throughout the body. In fact, some will refer to that now as inflammaging, which I believe is a very accurate description that marries both inflammation and this aging phenomenon, this longevity issue. All of us will die of excessive glycation or aging products unless something else gets in the way beforehand, heart disease or other things.
Wow. So somebody that is overweight or
Mm.
obese, the likelihood is that they are aging fast. I just want to not like knock that on their head. The likelihood is they're aging faster.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. And all of that's under this broad umbrella of glycation. So maybe we can talk about that and then we can contextualize that as it
Hmm.
relates to various organs and diseases. Sound all right?
So yeah, exactly. Let's go for it.
All right. So keep in mind, glycation is something that's entirely unregulated. There's no enzyme that's required, no extra energy. It's just going to happen based on the chemistry. That is the chemistry of the sugar molecule and the target, usually a protein, but can also be a fat or even a nucleic acid like your DNA. Now, most may have heard about a process called glycosylation. Let me just mention that for just a moment, then we'll put it to the side and focus on the more problematic glycation. So glycosylation is a normal, it's a necessary, it's an enzyme controlled process. Your body does it really well. And in this case, it uses a very specific set of enzymes to add a sugar molecule to a protein. And what your body does in that process is it puts little flags on cells and proteins and identifies them as being part of the team, part of us, non
Hmm.
outside, right? Those little flags help us distinguish between self and non self. The best examples of those happening, those events happening, would be in our immune system as our antibodies become more specialized, if you will. But
Hmm.
contrast that with glycation. It's in essence very similar, but again, glycation is unregulated. There's no control mechanism in place. Glycation happens when a sugar molecule like glucose or fructose randomly binds onto amino groups of proteins or lipids. It starts with a very unstable process called a Schiff base. Again, you got a molecule and a sugar that attaches via chemistry, and that's short term. That's a Schiff base, SCHIFF. The next step in the chemistry is it rearranges to become more stable, and that's an Amadori product. Maybe the best example that your audience would appreciate would be HbA1c, or glycated hemoglobin. That's an Amadori product. It's on its way to becoming more stable. More on HbA1c in a moment, because I think it's very applicable for us to be aware of that. Over time, these Amadori products will rearrange again, become oxidized, and they then form what are called AGEs, or advanced glycation end products. Those cannot be broken down. So there are helpful processes of glycosylation, but glycation never serves a helpful biological purpose. And that's what's impacting all of our tissues throughout the body.
Wow. You kind of broke my brain a little bit there. And what about the HG? I can't even, I can't remember the blooming terminology used there, but the HGA,
A1C?
A1C, yeah, what about that?
Yeah, so everybody knows about hemoglobin. Let's mention that for a moment.
Yeah.
Hemoglobin is a very famous protein. It's found in all of our red blood cells. The most abundant cell type in our body are red blood cells, and they have a lifespan of about 90 days, about 3 months in circulation. So hemoglobin's most famous job is to carry oxygen from the lungs to all the tissues and organs. But hemoglobin, unfortunately, is prone to glycation. Actually, HB, hemoglobin A1C, the A1C talks about the part of hemoglobin where glycation is most common. So if hemoglobin is glycated, it still does its job, but it doesn't do it as well. Um, and that's why we need to make new red blood cells. But don't worry, you're never going to run out, we hope. About 10 million red blood cells die every second, unfortunately, but about 10 million new ones are also made at about the same rate. So don't worry, you're going to have plenty. That revolving door is helpful. But there's a clinical measure now that is common in, when you go to the doctor for a physical exam, and it's called measuring your HbA1c. And all that is what percentage of your blood has been glycated. There's a scale, right? If you have between about 4 and 5.6 or so, that's the normal range. And what that means is about 4% of your glucose, or rather 4% of your hemoglobin has been glycated, up to about 5.5% glycated. And that's normal. Note, you can't go down to zero. There's nothing, Harrison, you and I can do to make our A1C level zero. Again, no glucose means the liver will step in and make sure there's a minimal amount. But that 5.6, 5.7 is key, because once you reach 5.7%, or your A1C is 5.7, you're clinically diagnosed as being pre-diabetic. At 6.5%, that's the clinical diagnosis threshold for diabetes. But I want to be very clear here. If we are starting to increase glycation of hemoglobin, keep in mind that's only a proxy measure. It's very easy to find glycation in the blood. There's billing aspects a clinician can use, and you could get, paid for looking at glycation in the blood, but it's really hard to find glycation in the heart, in the brain, in your joints, in your eyes. It's difficult to find that there, but note that if you have a higher A1C, glycation is also occurring in every tissue of your body.
And is there a way to physically tell
Mm.
whether you are experiencing glycation in your hemoglobin, for example, if your levels are too high? I'm guessing it can't carry around maybe oxygen as well, so you'd be more tired?
That's exactly right. But keep in mind, all those cells are dying so fast and new ones are being made. So the helpful aspect of hemoglobin, I don't think you'll ever perceive, I'm out of breath. I must have more glycation happening on my blood. I don't think we'll ever get to that point because it turns over so fast. But um, when you start looking at proteins that don't turn over very fast, for instance, collagens in our joints, for instance, have a half-life of decades. So that's where the burden becomes more severe. Um, but when you start to look at your A1C and it goes up, let's say it goes up past 5.7, here's something that'll blow the mind. It's not the cause of cardiac death, but if you look at the metadata, and what that means is you look at a host of hundreds of studies that have retrospectively identified A1C as it relates to death, at 5.7, you're 200 times more likely to die of cardiac arrest or cardiovascular death than at 5.0. So what that
Oh my
should say
God.
to our population is, let's say you go into the doctor, you get a 5.7 readout. What the physician would likely say is, hey, let's keep an eye on this. Let's maybe adjust your diet. go for walks after your meal. Let's just track it. And over time, in the next year or two, let's see if we can get it down. But what he's not telling you is that your risks are so much higher, not because hemoglobin is a problem, but because this burden of glucose spread throughout the body is starting to take a toll. So the best way to know you have glycation happening throughout the body is to look at your glycation score that you get from the doctor when you do an A1C test.
If you guys enjoyed that clip, please do me a huge favor before you go and head over to our Into the Mind podcast official page where we have the raw, uncut Into the Mind podcast, and hit that subscribe button. And the more subscribers we get, the more incredible guests we can get on the show. I really appreciate you guys for watching. Thank you so much. And I'll see you all real soon.